I'll go ahead and get everything started. Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning as we kick off our Fall 21 Virtual Wellness Series. My name is Kristen, and I'm a Wellness Coordinator for Healthy UNCG, which is UNCG's Employee Wellness Initiative. We also have on our call today Monica, who is another wellness coordinator with our department, and Stephanie Milroy, who is our amazing director. So this series has 4 sessions involved in it, including this one. So next week we have one on communication and setting boundaries. Then we have one on mobility and physical activity, and we finish it off with a caregiving session. Each session has the same link as this one, so you are welcome to join us in the upcoming weeks. We would love for everyone to be there and participate with us. So today's session is mental health with Amber Reed. I'm going to let Amber introduce herself before she gets started, but Amber is a certified health coach, a qualified professional and certified peer support specialist, and is a certified nutrition and wellness educator. So we're so lucky to have her here today to talk with us about mental health. Also, if there are any questions or anything, comments, questions in the chat, please feel free to put them in there. We will be kind of monitoring the chat for you, and we're here to answer questions and to give those questions to Amber. So yeah, we look forward to having everyone here today and for this great talk, and I'm gonna pass it to Amber.
Great, thank you. So nice to be here today. I hope I have some great information to share with everyone, and I do like questions. So if you do have questions, be sure to put them in the chat or save them for the end. And I think we're gonna have time for hopefully a question and answer session there at the end. So I will introduce myself here briefly. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you. Okay, there we go. The Zoom button menu was hiding my little button that said for the slideshow, so I had to find where the other one was. Okay, so we will all get settled in here. Just a few technical difficulties this morning, so just bear with me. So we are going to talk about mental health, like I said, but what I would like to start to do first is just to kind of get everyone on the same page. I'd like to do a little grounding exercise, because when we talk about mental health, we really have to bring in this idea of, stress. What role does that play? So we'll talk about that a little bit more today, but if you would, and if you feel comfortable, I would like to encourage you to go ahead and close your eyes. If you're not in a spot where that feels natural, feel free to leave your eyes open, but do find a comfortable space to sit and allow your body to relax. And I just want you to start by bringing into your mind's eye something, someone, or some memory maybe that brings you joy. Thinking about that person, place, or thing. Start to fill in all the details. You can see that memory there or that person there. Can you hear them laughing? Or can you hear the sounds of maybe the ocean crashing, depending on where you are? Really tap into those senses. Noticing what you see, what you hear, all of those senses. And as you hold that memory in place, go ahead and take a nice, slow, deep breath in and out. And do that one more time. And this time, feel it go through that heart center. Feel that breath come in and out through that heart center. And when you do it this next time, imagine that that breath going through that heart center is filling you with that joy and that peace of that person, place, or thing. Now just bringing you back to the present moment. If you want to blink your eyes open, if you had them closed. Welcome back. So I like to do that to kind of start off a presentation, especially when we're talking about mental health, simply because connecting with positive people, positive memory, you feel good, can have a profound impact on someone's mental health, what they're feeling at that moment. So just kind of putting that in your back pocket, thinking of that as a tool that you might be able to pull out at any point in time. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. So just a little bit about me. Like Kristen said, my name is Amber Reed, and I am a certified health coach, as well as a certified nutrition and wellness educator. I am a qualified mental health professional. So I am not licensed, but because of my education, training, and experience, that does qualify me to be able to work with people in the mental health realm. And fairly recently, right before the pandemic, I did open my own health coaching practice called Balanced Energies. And I use a lot of different modalities when working with clients, including heart math, which you got a little bit of a taste of. I threw a little bit of that in there in our little grounding exercise, but also emotional freedom technique. I use that quite often. That's also known as tapping, if anyone has ever heard of that. So I have been doing this for, since about 2014. So about 7 years now in some capacity or another. And I did start out doing sort of the coaching more in the mental health realm, and then finally took it over into more of the health and wellness coaching. So just putting a plug in for the health and wellness coaches at UNCG and making sure that y'all know that you can take advantage of those services as faculty and staff. So several of you may remember me from last spring, if you signed up for any of those, that spring series. We did one on thriving versus surviving. And I believe that Stephanie has said that she will make some of those recordings available to you if you'd like to go back and review those, because we're going to talk about how that kind of impacts what we're talking about today a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's just jump right in and talk about some mental health statistics. Okay, so this one may be a surprise, but if you think about it, especially in today's times with the pandemic, it might be more expected than say it was when this was actually true 5-10 years ago. But over 50% of Americans will be diagnosed with a mental health condition at some point in their lifetime. So when I'm in person, typically I have y'all look at each other, look to the person next to you and say, okay, who's it going to be? Because one out of the two of you sitting there will have that mental health diagnosis. So thinking about that's a lot of people. Okay. And within any given year, about 1 out of 5 Americans will experience a mental illness. Okay, so that is, first one is over the lifespan. This one is over the course of a year. And so let's take that a little bit further. And if we look at major depressive disorder, we see that same 20% prevalency. So about 1 in 5 will have a diagnosis of that major depression within their lifetime as well. So were those surprising statistics to anyone? Feel free to type in the chat. Try to make this as interactive as possible. Okay, I got some people, it was very surprising. Okay. So keep in mind, these statistics were available 5 years ago. Okay. What about now? So if we look at statistics that have been done since the pandemic began, what we can see is that the average share of adults reporting anxiety or depressive symptoms has increased from 11% to over 41%. And that, again, is between that 2-year period where we saw that spike in that pandemic. Okay, so that is what, close to almost 4 times what it was. And like I said, I work in the mental health realm, and we have seen this increase. So not only are we hearing the data, but we are actually seeing it in practice. This increase in symptoms is greatest in 18 to 24-year-olds. So thinking about that, for many of you who do actually work with students one-on-one, this is their prime age group, okay? Over 56% of them reported those anxiety and depressive symptoms over those last 2 years. Now, this percentage does go down with each subsequent age category. So it goes down to about just under 50%. It's about 49 is what it technically is close to for the 25 to 49. And then it goes down about another 10% for the next age group and about another 10% for that following age group. So you can kind of see the pattern that has come up with that. In the latest survey that was done in May, looking at some of these same depressive and anxiety symptoms, what we saw is that while the number spiked at like that 43%, I mentioned 41% earlier, it actually did spike to a 43% who were experiencing this, but we have seen that number start to come down a little bit. So now we're showing roughly about 30% of people are experiencing those symptoms. So, still a lot more than before, but hopefully we are starting to see that decline, that things may be getting better. This is just a graph that I thought was very interesting, really. It kind of shows what we've just talked about, was that over the course of the pandemic, we did see an uptick in the anxiety and or depressive symptoms. So this top line here is both, okay? And then you can see depression is the bottom, anxiety is in the middle there. And then it kind of dropped off for a little bit, but then spiked again really around the holidays, right? November, December, we started to see those increases again. And for those of you who have not been around mental health, that is a very trying time for a lot of people who have those mental health challenges. There's holidays, there's family, it's really exciting, but it can also be a source of stress and trauma. And we know that stress and trauma really does impact those mental health symptoms. Speaking of those mental health symptoms, thinking of the diagnosis, because we're going to start to get into, well, what does it look like with these different sorts of conditions? And, how do I know when I need to go see someone? But before we get there, I want you to take a look at this. I want you to think about mental health as being on a continuum. So, mental health really is a human condition. It's not that it is, this horrible stigmatized entity that we've made it out to be, right? As humans, we all have the potential to experience mental health challenges at times. This can be anything that ranges from, let's say, sadness. Maybe your pet dies or you lose a loved one, okay? So sadness, grief, and you can think about this as a continuum where we get progressively worse and worse symptoms that last longer and impact our functioning more. And so we'll talk about that too. But what we want to do is try to stay, you can see on the chart here, is to stay within our resiliency zone. You know, we've heard a lot about resiliency since the pandemic. How do I increase it? How do I stay, you know, resilient? What does all of this mean? And so, you know, a lot of times when we're talking about resiliency, we're actually talking about our ability to adjust to change. You know, how flexible can we be in the face of adversity? And the pandemic has really brought about a lot of change, a lot of adversity for a lot of people. So how was your ability? You know, were you able to make those changes easily? Were you able to make them easily at first, but maybe then as it kept going, it was a little bit harder and a little bit harder, you know? So how can you stay in that resilient zone? That's kind of where we all want to be. And then we start to think about it starting to go up. So if you think about this in another way, do you ever remember The Price is Right? Okay, yeah, some people for sure. Okay, I think it's still on. I'm not really 100% sure, but I think it might still be on. It just doesn't have Bob Barker. But anyway, so do you remember the mountain climber game? I think it was actually called Cliffhanger was the official name. I call it the mountain climber because the little mountain climber starts at the bottom, and as you know, you overbid on the prices, he starts to slowly climb up that mountain, right? Okay, so that's kind of like it is with stress. We start down here, we're in our resiliency zone, you know, everything's great, the grass is green, we're all happy and joyous. And then something comes in to start us up this little stress mountain. Okay, and the further we go, the steeper the incline, the harder it is, until we finally get to the top, right? And at the top, there's the pinnacle. What do I do? Do I go back down the mountain, or am I going to fall over? Okay. So you are kind of on that, you're that cliffhanger. What am I going to do? You're right at that point. And that's where we go into that freeze, because we're trying to decide what to do. Okay. Climbing that stress mountain is that fight or flight. Then we get to the freeze. We got to pause. What am I going to do? And if we fall over, you know, if the contestant bids too much and pushes us over our limits, we're falling off, we're going down into shutdown, we're going down into burnout. And that's really where depression lives. Okay, so thinking about that, where are you on that stress mountain? And then thinking about that mental health as that continuum, you know, where we have the ability to move back and forth, depending on the circumstances and our resources. You know, do we have the resources, the capacity to handle what's being demanded of us? So I know I threw a lot of information. I hope that made sense. Does anyone have any questions about that?
I think there's a question in the chat for you, Amber.
Okay.
It was.
I am not seeing it. So.
Okay. The question was, it was on the slide where you were showing the statistics. And the question was, do you know, or this person was wondering, what triggers the high rates of prevalence of major depressive disorder, MDD?
So in terms of what causes sort of major depression, is that kind of what we're talking about, the root causes?
I'm not sure. If there's clarification, feel free to put that into the chat and I can send it to Amber, but it's just sort of what are the things that are triggering those high rates of prevalence? Or do you know what might be triggering that? So maybe what causes it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go with that. And like Stephanie said, if you need clarification or want to clarify, if I can answer it better, let me know. So when we see really any sort of mental health challenge, we see there are several drivers, right? And for a long, long time, we were told, well, it's a chemical imbalance. We have neurotransmitters that are not right? We got too much of this one, too little of this one. And while that's not entirely false, it's not entirely true either. Okay, so there's a lot of things. If we look deeper, what is it that can be causing some of those imbalances? So we start to look at things like stress. stress is a major player when we start looking at mental health challenges. Sleep, how is your sleep? If you're not getting sleep, then that is going to exacerbate any predispositions that you may have. Lack of sleep is actually one of our greatest risk factors for suicide. So, go ahead, let me put this plug in and I'll get back to answering the question. But for those of you who haven't seen, you have the option to take a QPR, which is question, persuade, and refer, for suicide prevention training. And so if you take that training, you will learn some of these warning signs and how to work through to help identify those, and then to help get someone to the appropriate professionals that they would need. So stress, lack of sleep, also things like inflammation. There's a lot of research coming out now where we're talking about there's an inflammatory hypothesis around depression and mental health conditions, but what does that inflammatory process look like? It may be different for different people. Okay, just like stress may be different for different people. So those are some of the major triggers. Trauma. Okay. I happen to believe that we all experience trauma. There are all things that happen to us that we carry with us that impact us later. And that's really what makes trauma. It doesn't have to be necessarily a pandemic or a natural disaster or some sort of abuse or neglect. It can be simple things too when we talk about trauma, having that moment in middle school where you were embarrassed beyond belief, right, in front of the whole school. That can be traumatizing just as well. Or failing a test when you've always made A's, that can be traumatizing. Okay, so there's a lot of different things that can sort of spur or trigger these mental health challenges for people. I hope that answered the question a little bit better. And yes, thank you, Stephanie. I am also a QPR trainer as well. So lots of different things to look out for. So, okay. I want to get into, this is going to get into hopefully a little bit more and maybe explain a few more things to you. But I want to look at some of the signs and symptoms of different mental health diagnoses. So anxiety, depression would be kind of your diagnoses, but then there's related symptoms and syndromes. So like stress, what does it look like when we're under stress? Burnout, what does it look like when we're approaching sort of that burnout piece? And there are some caveats with some of these. So I'm going to do my best to kind of try to point those out. But if I miss one or you have a question, again, feel free to put that in the chat. So we will start with looking at stress. And again, if you were with me last spring for our series, you may have seen this graphic before. The way that I define stress is it's when our demand exceeds our capacity. And what I mean by capacity is our resources that we have available to us to handle what's being demanded. Do I have the education? Do I have the skills? Do I have the time? Do I have the health? Whatever. Do I have those resources in my arsenal to be able to deliver on what is being expected and demanded of me? Because if we don't, that's when we really experience that stress, okay? But when we're talking about stress, there's a couple of things that I want to point out. Stress is not really good or bad, all right? We give it a label and we react to it, but we can have positive stress. We can also have negative stress, but any event is not really stress or not stress. The event is what we define it to be. So I may experience something and you may experience something, the same something, right? But the interpretation that we take away can be very different. And so it's that interpretation that we take away that really determines, is it stressful for me or is it not stressful? for me. So when we determine that it is stressful, what really happens is that physiological cascade, right? We get the tense muscles, we get that release of cortisol, we get that jolt of adrenaline that can go off. These can be really good things if we have a deadline, we've got to get things done, we need to focus. But if left turned on, we never get a chance to come back and recover from that. When it becomes chronic, we really start to have those issues when it comes to stress. So take a moment. This is a lot of different signs and symptoms of stress. And I've divided them. You don't have to necessarily worry about that, but thinking of stress as a whole body occurrence. It occurs in your mind, your body, and your spirit, okay? There's also behavioral things that other people may notice. But just take a quick glance at those and see if there's anything that you would check off, and I can make this available if you would like it, that would indicate that maybe you're under excess amounts of stress. And feel free, if you'd like, to put it in the chat, to definitely feel free to share whatever you're comfortable with. One of the things that I typically get is body aches and pains. My muscles get really tense. I may get a headache. If I'm not paying attention, I'll catch myself clenching my jaw, right? A lot of jaw pain in there. Maybe you've had difficulty concentrating or focusing when you've been really stressed. You may have even had difficulty sleeping. A lot of these things start to work to reinforce one another. Okay. Stress eating, lots of these. I will definitely make sure this gets sent out to everyone. Yeah. I will be sending out a resource list in our follow-up email as well. So you will have lots of different resources. It was too much to try to put on the slides themselves. So they are very bare bones, but we will get you the appropriate resources. So do I have anyone who is not under stress at the moment? Because if I do, I want to know what you're doing. I'm just going to turn the presentation over to you at this point. Okay. So like I said, a little bit of stress can be good. It can keep us motivated. It can help us reach our goals, get to what we need to do. But when we don't have those periods to come back down and recover, that's when we get into trouble, right? Okay, so we want to try to come back into recovery, back into that resiliency zone. It's okay to bump out occasionally, but we do need to come back down. Okay. So what about anxiety? A lot of people, you may yourself, or you may have heard people talk about their anxiety or having anxiety attacks. And I'll often get the question, well, what's the difference between anxiety and panic? So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But some symptoms of anxiety really feel like, you're really keyed up, you're restless. Maybe you can't sit still, but at the same point, you may feel really fatigued because anxiety and worry eats up our energy, right? You're forgetting things, or you're having difficulty concentrating. Maybe your temper gets a little short. Again, you can see that anxiety show up in that muscle tension, because anxiety is a way that our body says, hey, I'm on high alert, right? There's a threat somewhere. And part of our evolutionary response to that is to be able to either fight or flee. We need tight muscles to run away. We also need tight muscles to be able to fight, right? So this is your body's way of saying, hey, there's a threat. We need to do something about it. So if you start to think about these signs and symptoms as your body trying to talk to you, then what can you do to help yourself listen? Sometimes our body screams at us and it really takes it screaming at us before we notice it, and it comes in very subtly. It gives you a little headache, kind of knocks on the door and says, hey, there's a threat. I'm here. We don't listen. We keep going. We keep pushing through, right? So it knocks a little louder. Oh, okay. We're going to add backache to that one. Oh, and your jaw is going to hurt too, right? Okay. We're still not listening. Still not listening. So it comes back and it knocks a little bit louder. I'm like, we're going to make this pain so bad you can't sleep. You'll listen if you can't sleep. Yep. Nope. Had a big presentation, kept right on going. Okay. So your body tries to give us little signals. These are all signals. They're warning signs of your body trying to tell you that, hey, there's a threat. I need to protect you, So really thinking about some of these mental health symptoms as adaptive responses. They really are trying to protect us in some way. But a lot of times in modern times, we keep going, we keep pushing through, our culture tells us to keep going. So there's a lot of factors that kind of come into play with that. So if you're noticing signs and symptoms like this, pay attention to it. It could be that you're having anxiety from the stress or the pressure. Now, how is this different from panic? Okay, so panic is like anxiety on steroids. You may start to sweat. You may start to tremble. Some people hyperventilate. You may get this overarching sense that you're dying, or that there's this doom sort of hanging over you. Okay, and it's very quick, it's very sudden, but then thankfully it goes away fairly suddenly too. So it doesn't last very long when you get into sort of those panic states, but it is your body taking that anxiety to the next level. Okay, and it's terrifying. It's very frightening, very frightening. Many times you may even get, heart palpitations, or your chest feels tight, like you can't breathe, and that freaks people out, especially if you've never had one before. So thinking about depression, okay, this was when our mountain climber fell off the ledge, right? Okay, so he has fallen off. He is now at the bottom of the mountain because he fell off the other side. This burnout, this shutdown, okay, depression, all of that kind of lives here. So if we're looking at this idea of what are those signs and symptoms of depression, some of them you're going to see have overlap with anxiety. And indeed, a lot of times we see these two occur together. So they co-occur, right? But you may have a persistent sadness that doesn't go away, or you may feel really empty inside. Some people report losing that pleasure, that just kind of apathetic about everything, that there's no pleasure, there's no joy. Feelings like they're feeling guilty or worthless. You start to see that helpless and hopeless feeling creep in a little bit. You will have decreased energy. All right. We fell off the mountain. We've used up all our energy climbing. Then we fell off the mountain. So quite possibly you are extremely tired, decreased energy, but at the same time, you may or may not be able to sleep. So there's sleep disturbances, and you could, fall on either end of that spectrum. So you may at this point start to have feelings of depression, my dog's distracted me, feelings of suicide that are associated with that helpless and hopelessness within that depression. And again, you can see those aches and pains start to creep in. Notice the overlap, okay? And so really what we're looking at, I didn't put in here today what we would be looking for to make a diagnosis, because honestly, at that point, if you're thinking about, a diagnosis level, that's the time that you really need to start reaching out to a mental health professional to make that diagnosis. Typically, we don't advise doing the self-diagnosis at that point. Okay, but this should give you an idea of what some of those signs and symptoms would be that you may want to look out for. Now, there's a lot here with burnout. And even though, just like stress isn't really a diagnosis per se, it is a collection of symptoms, a collection of things that are often seen. And so that's kind of what we see with burnout. So you may have these signs and symptoms that affect the physical, the mental, or the spiritual, and they affect the behavior as well. So when we look at sort of those physical signs and symptoms of burnout, you see a lot of the same ones that go with that anxiety, with that depression. Okay. Keep in mind this idea of the continuum. Anxiety is where I'm climbing that mountain, I'm gearing up, go further down that continuum, and I start to fall off the mountain. Then they're more severe. I'm getting to depression. I'm getting to burnout. Okay. So a lot of those we've already talked about. Same sorts of things. You may even have that brain fog. And you can see that with depression and stuff too, where you just kind of feel like you're in the clouds. Everything's really foggy. Nothing's clear. Your thoughts aren't clear. Your thinking's not clear. It's very difficult to make decisions. And then you go into sort of that emotional, where we have the mind and spirit. I think of the emotional as kind of connecting the mind and the spirit. Okay. So it's the stuff that kind of talks between the heart and the brain. So you may have those feelings come in, or those thoughts. So if we talk about feelings are typically one word, right? I'm sad. Okay. Sad, angry, joyful, happy. Those are feelings. But when I start saying I'm a failure, okay, that's a thought. A thought is typically a statement of something. And a lot of times we do see them go hand in hand, where that feeling then kind of dictates a thought, or a thought can dictate a feeling. Okay, so they kind of cycle in on one another. But you may have that loss of motivation. You start to kind of get that jaded outlook on life. You maybe start withdrawing from responsibilities. Those are things that you can see in yourself, possibly, but you can see really well in others, right? So these are ways that you can also kind of notice if someone close to you is maybe in need of help. Because sometimes once you cross into the mental health sort of realm, sometimes it is very hard for you, being the person right in that hot seat, to see that some of these things are happening. Okay. You may also use food. We're going to do a series coming up on food and mood. I think later this month and into November, and possibly further on past that. But if you're interested in sort of what is this food and mood connection? How does stress play into this? How does this factor in with my food cravings? We are going to be going and doing some deeper dives on that coming up. So look for some of those announcements coming out as well, because there is definitely a gut-brain connection. And so we do see the gut or gut dysfunction being a driver of mental health as well, going back to some of those, that question before with depression triggers. So how do we know if we need to seek help? And it really comes down to three main things, okay? Frequency. How often is this happening? Is it happening maybe once a week or once a month, or is it happening every day? Okay. Again, thinking of that continuum, right? And what that sort of graded response is. How long has this been happening? What is its duration? Has it just been happening, let's say, the last week? Or has this been an ongoing thing for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months? How long have these symptoms been going, and are they getting more severe? So what is the severity? How much are they impacting your daily functioning? Because when we start talking about that diagnosis, we're really looking at how much is this impacting someone's daily functioning, And so the more severe it is going to factor into, when to see help, but also when that diagnosis is appropriate to take it from, oh, they're just sad, to no, they're depressed. Okay, so thinking about frequency, duration, and severity of some of those signs and symptoms that we've just gone over. So I wanted to throw this in here, and I think that we've covered a lot of these, but if you're still questioning, what are some of the top 10 indicators that help may be needed? Okay, so out of all those signs and symptoms, I would say these are probably some of the most important. You are seeing an inability to experience that pleasure. Okay, so you're very apathetic. You're feeling hopeless and sad. Your thoughts aren't controllable at this point. Okay, they're coming in maybe uncontrollably or with force, or they're, it's turning into that rumination where you can't stop them. Sleep disturbances, changes in appetite, too much or not enough, either way. You're having those feelings come in that we see that are really problematic, that guilt, that remorse, that shame. Okay, and a lot of times that can go hand in hand with trauma exposure. So thinking about how those two might be connected. You're feeling especially on edge. Okay, so you're hyper vigilant. Everything is a threat, which then leads to even more excessive fatigue. You have those anger outbursts, or maybe you're just a little more irritable than normal. Okay, again, there's a range there. Maybe you've seen an increase in risk-taking behavior that is out of character. Okay, I'll add that in there because some people are just natural risk takers. That's what they do. That's who they are, right? But if it's out of character for you, for any of these, really, you're having thoughts of death or of suicide, or you have no motivation. Okay, those are some very significant warning signs that you may want to reach out to someone for help. So who do I reach out to, right? There's actually a lot of options, and a lot of times people don't realize that there are so many options. And so I've divided them for you to hopefully make a little more sense. But there are providers that provide therapy, but don't necessarily prescribe medication. And then there are those professionals who are responsible for prescribing the medications, but normally don't do a lot of the therapy. They may throw it in here and there, but that's not really their main function. Okay, so if we're talking about where can I go to get therapy, these are going to be people like your psychologist. Clinical psychologists typically have that PhD in psychology, and they are, diagnosing, assessing, and treating sort of those mental health challenges. You have your therapist or your counselors, depending on their specialty, their level of education, how much extra training they've received. We've got a lot of different names that fall in under those therapists and types of counselors. Okay. And then you also have, this is a fairly new thing, but that's a peer support specialist. Okay. And peer support specialists are actually, they act kind of like counselors, but they're not licensed in that way. What they do is they help people reach recovery goals. And they do this because they have had lived experience themselves. And so the medical community has started to realize that lived experience is training in and of itself. And so they've started to really bring these people in. You'll find them in emergency departments now. Several local agencies are using them to help with inpatient as well as outpatient types of care. Okay. Now, what about those if I need meds? Okay. Some people want to go that route. Some people don't. Some people, they really need those medications. Other people find other alternatives. There's a whole range of ways for this to be treated. So, I don't want to give the impression or have you go into this thinking that medication is the only option. It most definitely is not. But if we're talking about medication, those are your psychiatrists, okay? So those are medical doctors that have special training in psychiatry, in the brain itself, and work with those mental health conditions. And then you can also have psychiatric nurse practitioners, okay? Again, nurse practitioners who have that specialized training. So I hope all this is making sense and y'all are following me. Now, if we're talking about levels of care, there's lots of different levels of care, because sometimes, you know, we see it on TV. People they go crazy, right? And they're locked up in these mental health hospitals, and they paint this horrible picture. And granted, you know, especially 50, 60, 70 years ago, a lot of that stuff was very traumatic and very horrific. Some changes have been made. We've progressed a little bit, but we do have different levels. It's not all inpatient care where you're in the hospital. So just to go through these kind of briefly, there's the outpatient stuff. Anything that you do outside of the hospital, or, you know, outside of that setting where you would be confined. Okay, so this could be your self-help, you're reading books, you're taking educational webinars. Okay, so coming to something like this could be considered self-help for mental health, right? Maybe you're going to a support group. You know, we've all heard of AA. That's a support group focused around, you know, alcoholism. They have NA, okay, Narcotics Anonymous for drug addictions, right? But we also have mental health support groups that specialize around depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, panic, a lot of the things that we've been talking about. So finding a group that would work best for your needs. And then, of course, you have your counseling and therapy. Now, when we start looking at how this works, if we start to move into the higher levels, all of those outpatient services can be incorporated into these next levels as well. You just don't have the freedom to come and go quite as much as you would just as an outpatient kind of thing. So there's intensive outpatient therapy, and which is the IOP, intensive outpatient program, typically a day program, maybe a couple of hours a day, but you go home at night, you spend, you know, you sleep at home, all of that. Partial hospitalization, same sort of thing, you're home at night, but maybe you spend the majority of the day in these intensive sorts of counseling support sessions. 24-hour chair, you're held for 24 hours, then you're released. Then you go up to a sort of residential treatment where you may live on a campus site, you know, for weeks or months at a time, where you get these intensive sorts of treatment options, but then inpatient being the most intensive, okay, where you would actually probably be in that hospital setting itself. Now, where do I find help? And I'm going to send out a list of all of this. So I have like a 3-page document that I'm going to send out to you. It's going to cover pretty much what we just covered, okay, as far as levels of care, professionals, and then where to find help. But for your local mental health professionals, okay, call your insurance. A lot of times they have in-network, out-of-network. You're going to want to make sure you find someone who is available in-network for you, obviously, and they can give you a good starting place. You can also reach out to places like Psychology Today has a directory of therapists and counselors where you can seek services with them. And places like NAMI offers, it's a nonprofit, offers support groups and trainings, different things that you can become involved in that way. If you're thinking, okay, I know I need to get help, you know, I just need a therapist, I can plan it a couple weeks down the road, I'll be okay waiting, go with one of those options. If you feel like it's a crisis, like I need help right now at this moment, or it's not going to be pretty, then we start getting into some of these other options. So you have mobile crisis teams. So Therapeutic Alternatives is actually one that's based out of Asheboro, but they will come to you. You call them, tell them what's going on, whether it's with you or say a friend or family member, and they come to you, they do the assessment, and then they take you to the appropriate help. You also have crisis centers. We have a new Guilford County Behavioral Health Crisis Center, and they do 24/7 crisis care. So you can walk in at any point, and they're off 3rd Street, by the way, it's a new building, okay, off of 3rd Street. And they have a pediatric side as well as an adult side. So, but 24/7 crisis care. And then they also offer outpatient services, but those are on sort of a scheduled service plan. So you would call, find out the times. I'll send them to you, but then you would go during the appropriate times. And then, of course, you always have access to your emergency department, which is where you could go if you couldn't find help anywhere else, right? Calling 911 is not necessarily the best route, okay? Because police are trained to diffuse a situation. And a lot of times the person who is in that mental health crisis is not in their right faculties to be thinking about how to behave in front of law enforcement. Okay, so you get these two groups butting heads. They both want the same thing. They both want to get the person to help, right? But their approaches are very different. So it leads to a lot of conflict there. Coming up soon, it's not out yet, but we will have a 988. Okay, so instead of 911, you can call 988. Not available yet, but should be, I think, sometime next year, that is going to try to route those calls a little bit better, so that they can send an appropriately trained officer or even mental health team out to you to get you the appropriate help. You also have hotlines. There's a warm line. This is a 24/7 warm line where you can talk to a live person day or night, whenever. And they are based out of Charlotte. It's called Promise Resource Network. Your suicide hotline, which is for those suicidal crises, if you need someone to talk to about that. And there's also a text line that you can text if you're in that crisis situation, 741-741. So I hope that gives you a lot of different options that you're able to utilize. Those are just my references. And so I just wanted to wish you a happy future. Okay, none of us want to be sad and anxious and depressed and burnout. So I am wishing you all a happy future. And that is all that I have for you. I'm going to stop sharing and just bring us back and open it up. I noticed there's some stuff coming into the chat, but I haven't pulled it up. So I haven't seen if it's questions or not. But happy to answer any questions that you have. And again, like I said, I will send you out that resource list and that stress checklist for sure.
Amber, the questions in the chat, first of all, in the resource list that you send, will there be information on where people can find those local support groups that you mentioned, or is there a resource that you have that you could include around those support groups?
The main websites will be listed. So NAMI offers some support groups. So if you go to NAMI's main site, which will be listed on the resource I'm sending out, you will be able to locate those support groups. Different organizations, there are support groups offered throughout the community. NAMI is a great place to start. There are also other nonprofits. The only reason I'm hesitating is that some of these nonprofits that I'm about to mention are in the process of possibly creating partnerships. So I'm not sure what that means for kind of where they're going. But Kellen Foundation offers support groups, as well as Mental Health Greensboro. And so both of those would be options as well.
Great, thank you. The other question is, what resources would you recommend for people working and or living with people suffering from depression? So maybe a coworker, a spouse, a child.
NAMI has a great support group. It's called Friends and Family. And sometimes we forget that the friends and family need support, because it can be exhausting taking care and trying to help someone who is struggling, right? So NAMI offers a great support group there. Friends and Family. It used to be on Tuesday nights at the First Lutheran Church on the corner of Holden and Friendly. I'm not sure if that time has changed with the pandemic. I'm not really sure what their status is. I know a lot of places did move their groups online. So I would check the NAMI website to definitely check for that one. But that is, and that's the one that I know of, and there really needs to be more, because I think that's an unmet need in the community for those friends and family, for sure.
Any other questions for
Anything
Amber?
else?
You can unmute too if you'd like. Also, some of you may have questions that you may not be comfortable putting in the chat or unmuting. So when I send out the follow-up information, I will include Amber's email address and contact information for you all. And Amber, if you want to throw your email address in the chat too now, in case someone doesn't want to wait on our follow-up email, you're welcome to do that too. But I appreciate you taking time and sharing this information with us. We've done several presentations around various mental health topics, but I really appreciate you just sort of bringing it back to basics for our own knowledge, for what to look for in people that we're around and people we care about, and just sharing with us some really great resources. So I appreciate your time and everyone that is on the meeting today too, or on the webinar. We appreciate you spending your hour with us too. All right, and Amber just put her information in the chat, so you can reach out to her if you need anything immediate, and then you will have something from us. It usually takes a couple hours for our videos to get uploaded, but we'll have it out either later today or by tomorrow at the latest for you guys.
Thank you guys so much for coming and for being with us today.
Bye.